Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, I'm really struggling this morning with some of the stuff that I've said to you over the course of the last 20 months or so, particularly with regard to the Prime Minister Theresa May. I didn't necessarily conclude, but I suggested that it could be a sort of low-level chauvinism on my part. I appreciate it's not the most feminist of feelings, but I do think as a man, I look at women with a sense of protectiveness that perhaps I don't feel towards men. I mention this because I've said to you many, many times, despite being furiously at odds with much of what she has done politically, that I feel sorry for Theresa May, that she is, if you like, a victim of circumstance, albeit that she wanted the job. I suggested that in order to do the job, she's had to go along with some fairly unpleasant people, or she's had to accommodate some fairly unpleasant impulses and feelings. I think I was really wrong. And this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, good news for fans of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm quite capable of keeping the two separate and feeling that the inability to find either of them inspiring is probably a description of most people in Britain today. But I think I was horribly, horribly wrong. I've just been going back over what you could loosely describe as her greatest hits. And the more you think about it, and I appreciate that it's a very unfashionable thing to do, think about stuff. But the more you think about it, the more this Windrush scandal, for make no mistake, it is a scandal of the very first order, it actually fits into Theresa May's politics, or at least into her view of humanity. If I say the word empathy, what do you think it means? Because it's one of those words that actually is... it's quite fluid in its applications. I think, and I'm very conscious of how easy it is to slip into a kind of holier-than-thou mode when you're talking about this sort of thing, but I have to sometimes try to work out why some of us, and I mean us in the broadest and most universal of senses, some of us don't look at somebody with different skin colour and feel different from how we do when we look at someone with the same skin colour as us. Some of us don't think that foreigner equals frightening. Some of us just don't, and some of us do, and they're not necessarily bad people. Some of us don't subscribe to a sort of caste system, I would call it, whereby things over which you have no control, like geography and biology, should somehow determine where you sit in society. This is obviously a kind of hierarchy of importance. It explains why men like me, middle-aged, middle-class, white males, despite being by far the most privileged constituency in the country, indeed the world, are currently men with my background on both sides of the Atlantic are whining and moaning ceaselessly about how they're feeling exploited and how they're feeling left out. They genuinely believe somewhere deep inside that equality is their enemy, because if you've been in the box seat, or to be topical, if you have had the whip hand over other human beings, then the idea that there will be no whip hand at all, or, of course, if you want to subscribe to ugly Uncle Enoch's ideas, the idea that the whip hand is going to be given to somebody else, the people who yesterday you were free to whip, I guess you could struggle with it. I think that this is what it's all about. I think it's an innate sense of hierarchy. I can't come up with a better explanation, actually. And what is racism in its simplest sense, if not this almost intuitive belief that your worth as a human being is determined by where you come from, or how long you've been here, not by what you do. Otherwise, how could you possibly be calling for people to be punished according to the circumstances of their birth, or treated differently according to the circumstances of their birth. And I think that Theresa May, whether she realises it or not, is in that camp. I think when I read that in 2014 the government quietly removed a key protection from the statute books for some British residents of the Windrush generation who could face deportation, it's a clause that wasn't included in the 2014 Immigration Act. I think that she could do that because she wouldn't have seen the children of the Windrush generation as being quite as British as she is. And British isn't good enough, sorry. Equal to her. I genuinely think, as I look at what she did with the Abu Qatada deportation case, throwing red meat to the Daily Mail while deceiving the country, I genuinely think, when I remember how she lied about somebody who couldn't be deported because they had a cat, I genuinely think, when I look back to those go-home vans that she sent through the streets of our cities and towns, I genuinely think when I remember her allowing people in her top team to talk about EU citizens living here as playing cards or bargaining chips, I genuinely think that she has, like an awful lot of people of her generation and background, I think she has an inbuilt sense of human hierarchy. And I can't come up with, I'm kind of hoping you can, because this is quite a hefty accusation to lay at someone's feet. But I genuinely think that this is currently the only way to explain what's happened with regard to the Windrush generation. Because the reason I used the word empathy at the beginning of this is because part of the reason, and I want to do this in order to avoid the kind of holier-than-thou territory and to render my personal position quite selfish, rather than it being, oh, the great and the good. Let's make it selfish, okay? Let's make it about self-interest, something that we can all understand. I look at the Windrush generation, I look at the current scandal, which is seeing British people facing deportation, facing misery, facing confusion, facing fear because of their background, because of an accident of their birth. I look at these people, I see them as being just as British as me. Of course they are. And I think there, but for the grace of God, go I. So this doesn't have to be about the great liberal mission to protect everybody who's being exploited. You can make it selfish. You don't have to read John Rawls's theory of justice to recognise that if you make a system that's as fair as possible, then the majority benefit. But of course, a minority will always quite like an unfair system. And this Windrush thing speaks to a view that, well, it couldn't happen to me because I am different from you, because I'm not black, I'm not West Indian, I'm not the child of an immigrant. I couldn't end up in this situation because, well, it doesn't happen to people like me. And if you look at Theresa May through this lens, I worry that the evidence has been in front of us all along. I worry that the catalogue of decisions that she took as Home Secretary speaks of a woman who actually looks at her electorate, in this case, or at her population, and sees value according to colour. The Indian students who were deported, her insistence on reducing the number of students being issued with visas to come here, even after it was proved to her that claims the system was being wildly abused, were wrong. She persisted in that. The claim by, was George Osborne, was it? God, I know I sometimes boast about having a magpie memory, but I have to tell you that if I make any mistakes, I will rectify them. But I'm pretty sure that George Osborne reported last year, shortly after taking over at the Evening Standard, that there was one cabinet minister who blocked immediately after the referendum the idea that the British government should offer all EU citizens the right to remain in Britain. Yeah, it was. He wrote an editorial. It was an editorial in the London Evening Standard that said Theresa May was the sole cabinet minister to block a unilateral offer to EU citizens that they could remain in Britain in the days following the referendum. So, scratch colour. It's not just colour, is it? Because despite the protestations of some of my more eccentric callers over the years, most European Union citizens are the same colour as Theresa May. So she was the only cabinet minister to block the most simple, the most humanitarian, and if you want to use the language of a vicar's daughter, the most Christian of options with regard to our neighbours from France and Spain and Poland and Romania and Portugal and elsewhere. One cabinet minister, just one, said no. And if this isn't true, take it up with George Osborne. This is what he wrote. In the days immediately after the referendum, David Cameron wanted to reassure EU citizens they would be allowed to stay. All his cabinet agreed with that unilateral offer, except his Home Secretary, Mrs May, who insisted on blocking it. Consigning, as we now know, 3 million people in this country to confusion and fear. So how could you do that? Because it couldn't happen to me. How could you contemplate removing a phrase from the Immigration Act in 2014 that would, and I've checked, immigration lawyers have been warning and complaining about this system for a lot longer than even Amelia Gentleman, the brilliant Guardian journalist who's brought it kicking and screaming into the daylight. They knew, the Home Office knew that this was going to happen, and they knew that it was happening, and they did nothing. Why? Well, because it couldn't happen to me. And I think that if we could somehow knit together my clumsy meanderings over the last 13 or 14 minutes, but with the two poles of empathy and hierarchy, I think it all begins to make sense. Doesn't it? Because Daniel Hannan, the prominent Brexiter, has tweeted this morning, even by his own, preternaturally stupid standards, that this whole story somehow proves that the system works. And I looked at that and I thought about it for quite a long time, because I wanted to begin at least to come to an understanding how somebody could hear a story of misery, of suffering, people ending up, we know for certain, as far down the road towards deportation as Heathrow. One immigration minister suggested yesterday that some cases would have gone further. That dread phrase, deported in error, has entered into the political vocabulary. And I thought to myself, how can anyone look at this and think, oh yes, it proves the system works? It's a bit like saying thalidomide proves that the system works, because after children started being born with terrible deformities, we outlawed the drug. It's the opposite of proving that the system works. It proves that the system is rotten. But how could you come to the conclusion that it proves the system works? And the answer is by seeing the people who've suffered, not as people, but as statistics or as numbers. There's a Swiss novelist I'm not particularly familiar with, but one line he wrote in the 1950s really resonates today. We wanted workers, but we ended up with people. Never crossed my mind that the Windrush generation were somehow less than me. Never entered my consciousness, or most of yours, that by dint of hailing from Jamaica or Grenada or Martinique or wherever it may be, by dint of hailing from, not Martinique actually, that's a bad example, but you take the point. By dint of hailing from that country, you were somehow less than me. Less what? And suddenly all this toxic language of the last few years begins to make more sense to people like me. They talk about, we want our country back. What the hell do you mean? You voted Brexit because there were too many brown faces on the tills in Tesco's. What the hell is wrong with you? And when I said to you, as I have done many times over the last 2 years, I feel sorry for Theresa May, because she's got to keep a lid on these people. She has to recognise their relevance to Brexit and to modern politics, and I think she does so holding her nose out of a sense of duty. I don't think she's been holding her nose at all. I think she subscribes to the notion of a hierarchy. I think she believes that the children of the Windrush generation are somehow inferior to the children of Church of England vicars, somehow less deserving of rights, somehow less British. And I can't, at this moment, come up with a better explanation of how this could have happened. But because I am such a snowflake, I'm really hoping that you can. 0345 6060 973. If we didn't have time to talk to you yesterday about your specific and personal experience of this story, we will find the time today. But I'm asking really how the hell you think this could have happened. 0345 6060 973. Did I not say Max Frisch? I thought I said Max Frisch. If I got his name wrong, I'm sorry. We wanted workers, but we ended up with people. I think if you're going to suggest that this scandal somehow proves the system works, or if you ignored warnings as Home Secretary that this was going to happen, I think you see these workers and their children as somehow less than you see yourself. I think you see them as somehow less than people. And she's Prime Minister. And I think that we have nailed it, actually. It's taken a while, but the R word looms over the whole of this conversation, and still, despite Steve Bannon and his friends' best efforts, people are still ashamed of being called racist in this country, probably not for much longer. But we are looking at a racist government policy, a profoundly racist, I'll say it, Prime Minister. How else do you make sense of what's happening? I think Amber Rudd came pretty close to saying this yesterday, actually. It's going to be very interesting to see the Daily Mail today just beginning to agitate against the current Home Secretary, because, of course, they can't agitate against the Home Secretary who actually introduced the system that has consigned these people to their scandalous fate. And you don't hire the former political editor of the Daily Mail as your chief spokesman for nothing, do you? You do that so that you can keep the lines of communication open and get an easy ride. So Theresa May brought these rules in. Amber Rudd is on duty when the reality bites. Who are you going to blame? The person that brought them in and was warned that this would happen, or the person that's charged with sorting out the mess? Yeah. Matthew's in High Wycombe. Matthew, what do you think?
James, how's it going? I mean, I'd just like to comment here. I think there's two things. One is, if you're going to make the system hard and the rules rigid, it's no surprise that people are going to get lost. People at the margins are going to get lost or hurt by what's going on. And I think
this is
political pressure.
Yeah, and this is where the idea, well, yeah, all right, there's going to be some collateral damage, but it couldn't possibly be me or people like me begins
Exactly.
to look like racism. And I don't want to end up there for the record, but that's where I am at the moment.
Well, it might not even. You could talk about conscious and subconscious prejudice, but I think, like, for example, I don't think Theresa May probably knows anyone personally who doesn't have a passport or copies of passports or gone overseas multiple times in the last 20 years.
Sure.
The idea that you wouldn't have one and you couldn't bring even a copy of an old one to prove, oh, well, I am Joe somebody.
Yes, but it's so much more than that. It's proving where you've been and that you've been here for each of the last 4 decades. And I'm pretty sure there's people in the cabinet that would struggle to do that. And Boris Johnson would be terrified of his wife finding out.
Exactly. Well, the other thing I want to say is, I'm the attitude, I'm a white immigrant,
Yes.
South African, and I wept when I got my leave to remain, because it meant that I didn't go down the awful path less travelled of appeals, Home Office appeals and everything else. So there are a lot of people, I'm sure, rightly or wrongly, who are getting caught in the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is you don't care.
Yeah.
I paid a lawyer to look after me because under budget cuts, the Home Office charges you for calling through. So it's basically it's a welcome side effect. If we get the numbers down, let's just get the numbers down. Let's just get the numbers down. I think
And this is what she hinted at. I think the Home Secretary hinted at yesterday when she talked about people. That she talked about her department seeing numbers rather than people, didn't she? And I think that was a pretty obvious dig at the Prime Minister, but of course the newspapers are so right-wing that no one is going to join the dots in that way at the moment. But that's what she meant, isn't it? It's this obsession with numbers. You forget that they're people. We wanted workers. We ended up with people.
Well, the irony, if I can jump briefly to what Powell was talking, this is the hilarious thing about the situation is the people who who don't want the Windrush people to come here, they will say, well, we should keep our English traditions, but if immigrants keep their traditions, well, that's not assimilating. But then privately, they're the same people who don't like people marrying across cultures.
Yes, well, but I think we've got a very 21st century example of that with regard to Muslims, which, of course, is, thankfully, they're not on the receiving end of the abuse in this conversation, but they insist that Muslims integrate, and then, oddly, when one of them gets elected London mayor, they go absolutely nuts. Can't get much more integrated than Sadiq Khan, but that's a conversation for another day. Steer me away from the conclusion that Theresa May is racist. Let's have a look at the Abu Qatada case, because if you're not across the facts, you should be. Let's hear a little clip of her talking in 2013.
The deportation of Abu Qatada has taken 12 years and cost over £1.7 million in legal fees for both sides. That is not acceptable to the public, and it's not acceptable to me. We must make sure it never happens again. First, we have to do something about the legal fees spent by defendants and paid by the taxpayer, not to mention the benefits they also claim. Second, we have to remove the many layers of appeal that are available to foreign nationals we want to deport. And third, we have to do something about the crazy interpretation of our human rights laws.
Right. Now, the thing about Abu Qatada was that when Jordan sought his extradition from this country, they were doing so based upon information gained from torture, right? And we currently in this country don't allow people to be extradited to countries that will put them on trial using evidence that's been gained from torture. So you've just heard her describe a 12-year battle and use it to rail against the European Convention on Human Rights, to rail against legal aid, and to rail against, I suppose you'd have to say, the system. But she didn't have to do any of that, okay? She didn't have to do any of that, because at the end of that 12-year period, when he got deported, do you know what happened? And this is just true, and I've known this for years, but it all begins to make rather grisly sense. She, after that very long battle that you've just heard her describe, she just said, well, all right, Jordan, you can have him, but do you promise not to use evidence used at torture? And Jordan said yes, and the man got deported. So that entire 12-year battle, she instructed 3 QCs while moaning about the legal aid side of it. That entire battle was constructed to add to the idea that the European Convention on Human Rights, the legal aid system, and the freedom that this country has to deport people were all in need of being changed. And I don't use this word lightly, but she was lying then. And when she tries to portray this Windrush scandal as a bureaucratic snafu or an avoidable mess, she's lying now. 10:34. I will take more calls, I promise, but I just think it's important to get facts and information out there, because I'm not sure you're going to hear it anywhere else. Although I would recommend that you follow David Allen Green on Twitter, a legal expert who has steered his followers through the Abu Qatada case quite beautifully. And as I explained to you a moment ago, it ended with her doing, at the end of a torturous process, what she could have done at the beginning, which was agree to deport Abu Qatada to Jordan on the proviso that Jordan promised not to use evidence that had been gained with torture. And so he went. But she'd shouted at the courts, enemies of the people. Who wrote the Enemies of the People headline? Who wrote the article that appeared under Enemies of the People on the front page of the Daily Mail? The political editor of that newspaper, who is now working at Downing Street. So she shouted at the courts, and she shouted at Europe, as David Allen Green points out. Then, having agreed not to allow him to be deported to a country under the Convention on Human Rights that would use torture to prosecute him, he went. And she pretended, or before that, she suggested that the UK should temporarily leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which got kicked squarely into touch by, I think, Ken Clarke, Lord Chancellor. But the tabloids loved it, you see. They loved it. The kind of tabloids that run articles calling judges enemies of the people, written by men who end up working in a senior position at 10 Downing Street after Theresa May becomes Prime Minister. So the tabloids loved it, shouting at Europe, shouting at the courts, despite the fact that she was misleading the public. Abu Qatada went to Jordan. That was it. The way she presented it to the public was that she deported him somehow despite the European Convention on Human Rights. As David Allen Green writes this morning, huffing and puffing and exciting the tabloids and threatening suspension and appealing, and then doing what she knew all along she would have to do. What does she do now? Shouting at the courts, hiring the man who described judges as enemies of the people, shouting at Europe. And yeah, of course, she did campaign, sort of, to remain. One more thing before we go back to the phones on this. You ring me up on anything today. I'm just burbling and sharing. It's not necessarily a question that you need to answer, but if you are being affected by the Windrush story, you will go to the front of the queue. Because those vans, those posters, go home or face arrest, the hostile environment. Shadow Home Secretary at the time accused the Conservatives of using the language of the National Front. But, of course, if you know that it's disgusting, but you also know that it's not going to upset people like me, it's not going to upset people like me, not people on my level in this society. We'll be fine. You send the vans out, even if you probably know all along that you would subsequently have to, well, withdraw and almost apologise.
So I didn't have a flash of blinding light one day and walk into the Home Office and say, I know, why don't we do this? What I have done is looked at the interim evaluation in relation to the vans. There were some returns achieved as a result of that, but I think politicians should be willing to step up to the plate and say when they think something actually hasn't been as good an idea, and we won't be rolling out the vans. They were too much of a blunt instrument.
Too much of a blunt instrument. Problem is, you'd already smashed the country over the head with it. Well, not the whole country. Not people like you. I don't know. Martin's in Bury St Edmunds. Martin, you better interrupt me, otherwise I've got a feeling I'm going to carry on until 1 o'clock. What would you like to say?
OK, good morning, James. Yes, you are right, but I rather think some of your media colleagues are letting the government off the hook.
Although they probably are, but I can't speak for them. I can only speak for me.
No, but regarding their use of language, for example, I listened to Mr Liddington earlier talking about Home Office mismanagement, and Amber Rudd has instructed officials as if they're separate from the government. Now, civil servants don't set policy, they carry out government policy. Now, if crime reduced, the government wouldn't say, the civil servants have reduced crime. They say the government has reduced crime.
I think what Amber Rudd did yesterday was announce a task force to fix the problem. It doesn't necessarily follow from that she's claiming the civil servants caused the problem. I felt she came as close as she could because, of course, she's not pro-Brexit. She was pro-Remain, which means she is sackable in this government. She came as close as she could to saying this is because Theresa May didn't see these people as people. She saw them as numbers.
Yeah, but also the Daily Mail, another example, talking about bungling officials. I'm sorry, these bungling officials work for Amber Rudd and they work for Theresa May. So I think it's rather cowardly to sort of try and deflect the blame onto faceless civil servants.
The blame lies squarely and completely with Theresa May, and it is a blame born of the fact that I genuinely, and I really hesitate, I don't hesitate to say it, that sounds stupid because I'm about to say it, I don't like saying it, I don't think she can quite see the word immigrant and equate it with the word person. I think she sees two different things. You are either an immigrant or you are a full person like me.
I quite agree.
Do you really, though?
Yes, because next week's headline in the Daily Mail could be bungling officials have let 1 million people overstay in this country. What is Theresa May doing about it?
It wouldn't say people, would it?
And then she'll have to stand up.
It wouldn't say people, would it? It would say migrants.
Yeah, it would say migrants, you're quite right, but... No, I do quite agree with you, and I'm not coming at this from a party political point of view because I'm saying the same thing about Sadiq Khan last week when he was trying to blame the government for the rise in crime in London. You know, I was saying, well, if crime reduced, he wouldn't say, well done government, he'd say, well done me, I've reduced crime.
I guess you're right, aren't you? Yes, that's always someone else's fault when it goes wrong. It's always down to me when it goes well. The universal language of politics. Remember the cat as well. Let's just skip ahead now because those last two comments were from her time as Home Secretary in 2013. Students and cats at the Tory party conference in 2015. Let's let the cat out of the bag, shall we?
We all know the stories about the Human Rights Act. The violent drug dealer who cannot be sent home because his daughter, for whom he pays no maintenance, lives here. The robber who cannot be removed because he has a girlfriend. The illegal immigrant who cannot be deported because, and I am not making this up, because he had a pet cat.
6 words there. I want you to remember them. I am not making this up. I think it was the next day that this happened.
I wasn't making it up. Of course, everything that went into my speech was checked. I gather that there has been some question now from a spokesman questioning that. And, of course, I will look at it again. I mean, you wouldn't expect me to say any more, but it was checked before it went in.
What the judge actually said in the famous case was that the man in question did have a domestic life, he had a partner, and one of the things he pointed to was that they had a cat. He wasn't actually saying, I can't deport you because you've got a cat. You accept that?
What I accept was, Andrew, that this was not the case which made the argument for the immigration rules changing.
This is a case you used in your speech, explaining why the immigration rules you felt needed changing. I am not making this up. But if it turns out that a Daily Mail journalist did, I'll probably give him a job. And same speech, she went back to the vans.
Overall, after my first 2 years as Home Secretary, net migration, which had reached 320,000 in 2005, fell to 154,000. Since then, however, the numbers have doubled once more. One of the reasons is student visas. And let me be clear about students. We welcome students coming to study, but the fact is, too many of them are not returning home as soon as their visa runs out. If they have a graduate job, that is fine. If not, they must return home. So I don't care what university lobbyists say, the rules must be enforced. Students, yes. Overstayers, no. And the universities must make this happen.
So the estimate she was working from for the overstaying story was close to 100,000 a year. Then they actually counted. The Office for National Statistics research data based on recently created exit checks at Britain's border, and found that the number was actually 4,600 who'd overstayed in the previous year. And yet still she insisted that student visas be included in the overall immigration figures. Again, to the complete confusion of the rest of the Cabinet. The Cabinet, in which you will remember, she was the only one, according to George Osborne, who, you know, might not be Mr. Trustworthy, but at least we know he was there. According to George Osborne, she was the only member of David Cameron's Cabinet to block an immediate promise to EU citizens living here after the referendum that their rights and status would be completely unchanged. Now, why on earth would she have done that? Why on earth would she have not extended simple equality to those 3 million people? Well, maybe because they're not like her.
You'd like both Brits abroad and migrants here to stay forever, basically.
Well, nobody necessarily stays anywhere forever. But I think what's important...
But at their choice.
What's important is there will be a negotiation here as to how we deal with that issue of people who are already here and who have established life here, and Brits who've established a life in other countries within the European Union. And that is, their position at the moment is as it has been. There's no change at the moment, but of course we have to factor that into the negotiation.
So they're bargaining chips, they're playing cards, and you, Prime Minister, were the only person in the Cabinet that felt they shouldn't have just been treated like humans, like citizens, like people who are equal to you. And how have you treated the children of the Windrush generation? Like people who are equal to you, or like people who are somehow less than you? People who are somehow inferior? Because that makes you racist. So I hope that I'm wrong. Then, of course, you've got the 3 million people who are waiting to find out what their fate will hold after Article 50 kicks in March 2019, or indeed after the period of transition ends. And how much confidence will they have, looking at the Windrush scandal, that the Home Office is fit for purpose when it comes to registering and properly recognising their rights? Come on, everyone can agree now, can't they? I mean, now we can really start dividing ourselves. And it works rather nicely in the shadow of that Enoch Powell anniversary. Can we now actually start dividing ourselves between people who are prepared to admit in public that they think your fundamental value as a human being is determined by geography and accidents of birth, or you're on my side 0345 606 0973. Ian's in Leeds. Ian, I feel I should take some calls. I've effectively done one of my longest monologues ever this morning, so I'm glad you're here. What would you like to say?
Yeah. It's interesting when you talked about empathy.
Yes.
Because, my parents are from the Caribbean themselves.
Right.
My dad was from St. Kitts and Mum was from Nevis. And, I remember my dad telling me before he passed away several years ago that when he was a schoolboy, they used to call Britain the mother country.
Yes.
They used to sing God Save the King in those days.
Mm.
And, there was a lot of empathy, and you could even call it love for Britain, even though they'd never actually come to this country at that point.
Well, that's
when they came to this country.
Part of the reason why they were prepared to go to war on our side, isn't it? A lot of people from the West Indies.
Well, absolutely, in both World Wars and prior.
Yes.
And here's the thing, of course, when they got to this country, many from the so-called Windrush generations, saw an ugly side to this country. I mean, I can remember my older brother talking about, in the 1980s when he had pitched battles in the centre of Leeds with members of the National Front.
Yeah, but today, I'm sorry, that noise I made then, that yeah, sounded as if I was trying to hurry you along or move away. Absolutely, I'm not. Yeah. But I could... At that point and at this point, I never would have brought the National Front into a conversation about government policy. Do you see what I mean? I know that racists exist. I'm just slightly surprised to find myself this morning wondering very seriously whether we've got one in Downing Street.
Well, here's the thing, you see. I think what it is politicians have for far too long have taken the path of least resistance. We have a situation now where the tail is wagging the dog. And people will point to far-right characters like Nigel Farage and say, oh, well, he's never been in government. But now he's reached a point, people like Nigel Farage have reached a point where they don't need to be in government because many of their policies are being enacted.
It's not even policies, is it? I mean, the Windrush thing is a policy, but it's more of a worldview, I think, that you're describing, and that worldview is... if you are not like me, you are not worth as much as me. Well,
there is that is true. But, this is why some people refer to the likes of UKIP as a sort of Tory Trojan horse.
Yes, well, of course they do, because it is. Theresa May's completely subsumed that kind of rhetoric, as we now see in the case of Paulette Wilson, a woman who has every right to be here, as much right to be here as Theresa May, ends up incarcerated at Yarl's Wood. Actually incarcerated. And Daniel Hannan, key Brexiteer, describes this as evidence that the system works.
Well, I don't know what sort of universe Daniel Hannan is from, but...
The Anglosphere is the word he uses. And, I remember interviewing him a couple of years ago. What does he mean by Anglosphere? I genuinely don't know what that... I do now. I know exactly what that means.
Well, yeah...
You're not from the Anglosphere, Ian.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like, Norman Tebbit, for example, when he actually... I remember he said this to the late broadcaster, Darcus Howe.
Yes.
It was Darcus Howe. And he said to Darcus, he said to Darcus Howe that you are not ethnically English.
Did he? I'll take your word for that.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, no, yeah, he definitely did say on a TV programme. He said, you are not ethnically English. Which, I suppose,
I thought,
in one sense...
yeah, you can make the biological argument or whatever it is, although I don't think anybody is if we were all properly tested. How old are you?
How old am I?
Yeah.
46.
Why'd you have to think about it?
No, because...
What? In case your girlfriend's... in case your girlfriend's listening, isn't it?
No, 46. I'm just what it is, I just don't want to sound too old.
No, I'm 46 as well. You sound like a youngster. And obviously ethnically we're different, but I wonder whether we would both answer this question the same. I thought that we'd buried this stuff 10 years ago.
So did I.
Did you?
Well, yes and no, because you see, here's the thing. A lot of racism in this country has been sort of... it's more... I thought it was more covert rather than overt. Because I know I have been, and I've got brothers and sisters who could say the same as me. If they were speaking to you right now, been to job interviews, the way you sound on the phone is different to what they see when you knock on the door and pop your head around the corner. And I have had potential employers do a double take when I actually go through the door.
Yes.
And I know it's happened to.
And again, I would have.
Brother and sister of mine.
I would have previously said, yeah, well, there's always going to be bad apples in every barrel. There's always going to be bosses who exercise a little bit of prejudice. But when you reference UKIP and when you reference the kind of people that unveil those toxic Nazi posters hours before Joe Cox gets murdered by a white supremacist terrorist, you have to recognise that history's taught us it's always there, bubbling under. It just needs the right kind of demagogues and hate preachers to come along and reignite it. Factor in a refugee crisis and a financial crisis, Ian, and Theresa May's premiership suddenly makes sense.
Well,
I don't like this conversation, mate. I'm sure you don't either. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not happy with it, but I'm just looking for a better explanation of the facts that I've shared this hour, and there aren't any forthcoming yet.
Well, I was in two minds as to whether to phone you or not, but
Sure.
I actually did, because I thought, you know what, I wanted to sort of get it off my chest.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because the situation is that I think that, and I'm going to say it, I think the referendum, and I think what's happened in the US with the election of Donald Trump, I think it's brought a lot of this to the fore.
Well, of course it has.
And
I think everyone kind of agrees about that. It's only Steve Bannon so far who's come forward to say, be proud of being called racist. The rest of them are still waiting for their moment.
Yeah, and, being the sort of person I am, I now feel just more... sometimes it's hard to find the right words, but I feel more empowered to actually speak out about these sort of things. Whereas before, if you would have said racism before, people would have said, "Oh, you're just playing the race card."
Yeah, they would to you.
Or you just got a chip in your shoulder.
And then we had political correctness for a while, or common decency, as we prefer to call it, which meant that people weren't allowed to say stuff that would be offensive, and they were complaining about that constantly. And it was a little heavy-handed in its policing of toxic language, but my God, it doesn't take long for base racism to become government policy once that heavy-handed policing has been removed, does it?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Well, this is a cheery exchange, Ian.
Yeah, well, so sorry I couldn't tee you up, but...
You have, my friend, thank you. It's 10:57. Philip's in Guildford. Philip, what would you like to say?
Good morning to you, James. Well, I wanted to say one or two things. We now know that Mrs. May, when she was Home Secretary, carefully burnished her credentials on the backs of the Windrush generation, because we know that she was warned by civil servants and other interested groups, speaking on behalf of migrant communities, that this was going to be the fallout, but she pressed ahead with it knowingly and culpably. The pedigree for this sort of language in the Conservative Party goes back all my life, and I'm in my late 50s now. I remember, and I would urge your listeners to Google Peter Lilly's "I've Got a Little List" speech at the party conference, and the list of Conservative bigwigs that have tried to pursue further their careers on the backs of this disgusting language goes on decade after decade.
Well, we haven't heard disgusting language yet in the context of the Windrush thing. What we do know, for people who are just tuning in, they were told that not only were warnings issued, but a decision was taken when the 2014 Immigration Act was written not to offer protection of Commonwealth residents who hadn't achieved settled status. They actively removed this clause, and I believe they refused to reinstate it. And that makes it deliberate. That makes it conscious.
That's what I meant to say, James, rather than that using that adjective to describe the language. It's just the tone is age long. And Mrs. May, oddly enough, when she was trying to burnish her career again even earlier, she stood in front of her party and said, "Do you know what they call us? They call us the nasty party." And you couldn't pick the words out of it. You couldn't make it up. I thought that David Lammy...
he was magnificent yesterday, wasn't he?
Devastating piece of work. he made on the Home Secretary yesterday.
He tried out a few of those lines with us before he got to the House of Commons. I thought that was quite nice to see, wasn't
it? and when he sat down, the utter indignation on his face was burning, and I thought it spoke for everyone in the country, black, white, and everybody else. We all felt the same as he felt. It was just human indignation that the government, that any British government worthy of the name should dabble in this sort of
I don't know what word to use, and nor do you. Well, I mean, what are we describing here? Is it? I mean, is it a mild form of apartheid? Is it some sort of? I mean, what is it? How can a woman end up being imprisoned for the crime of not being able to prove she's been here for the last 40 years? Because if it can happen to her, this is what I meant by empathy at the very top of the show, then normal people would go, well, if it can happen to her because of a government policy, it could happen to me. But if you bring in race, you think, well, no, it couldn't happen to me.
It makes you want to, honestly, it almost makes you want to weep.
Well, a lot of people have, and I suspect if it was my mum who'd been locked up at Yarl's Wood, then I would have been. Buckets. Philip, thank you. I'm going to carry on with this for as long as you want, or as long as I've got air in my lungs today, actually, because it's all here. It's not opinion, it's not debate, it's all factual. The only bit that veers into opinion and debate and leaves me genuinely discomforted and uncomfortable is the idea that when you look at everything from the illegal immigrant who was allowed to stay because he had a cat, I am not making this up, right through to the one member of cabinet that told EU citizens to whistle for their rights, there's only one conclusion that we're arriving at so far. And after the colour of your skin or the country of your birth becomes grounds for you being rendered a second-class citizen of these islands, history suggests that they'll come after the financial status you enjoy next, so that you'll get treated worse if you're poor. Have you heard any right-wingers yet suggesting that the NHS needs to be seriously changed? Did you see the front page of the Times yesterday suggesting massive root and branch change to NHS funding? Everything, increasingly it seems to me, comes down to this perception of why am I paying for him? Everything does. All of the politics that I find frightening comes, why am I paying for him? He's poorer than me. He's blacker than me. He wasn't born here. Why am I paying for him? And you have to realise that unless you really are in a relatively small but immensely privileged minority, people are paying for you. And that, I suspect, is part of the reason for the Windrush thing. Because it would cost you £973 to register your child, I think, if I've understood the numbers correctly. £973 to register your child for citizenship here. And in other countries, the figure is less than €100, 80 euros in Belgium, 55 euros in France. A child's registration here, even if you were born here, remember, to a parent who came from somewhere else, you'd be paying 973 quid. They don't have it. Dee is in Birmingham. Dee, what made you pick up the phone today?
Oh, hi, yeah.
Hi,
I picked up the phone today because I've been trying to sort out my status now for 2 years, just over 2 years. First, I was sacked from my position. The first issue, I knew that I had an issue.
What happened? To go back to the beginning. Let's start at the beginning, Dee. You've got all the time you want, I promise.
Okay. In 2016, my husband passed away. I took time off work to grieve.
Yeah.
On returning to work, I was called into the office after about 2 weeks and said that I had 24 hours to prove I had the right to work in this country.
So your parents were Windrush, were they?
No, my mother brought me and my sister over here when I was 2. My sister was 7 from Rhodesia.
Okay, yes.
Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Of course, when I got fired, I was in shock, and my first thought was to actually sue the company for firing me, because I've worked all my life here.
Yes.
Since I was 16, I've been educated here. I've had IVF.
Yes. You mentioned that just to prove how far into the system you'd gone, because some people might wonder what that's got to do with the price of eggs, but I understand. You're demonstrating you were absolutely immersed in the system. You couldn't have felt more part of the fabric of the country, as is proved by the IVF treatment on the NHS. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. My first port of call was to go to the Home Office in Croydon, where I was locked up in an area. Everything was taken from me.
How old are you, Dee? Do you mind me asking you that?
I'm 58.
58 years old. You've lived there since you were 2?
Since I was 2.
Since you were 2. And the reason why the company needed proof that you... Do we know why? Is it the same as what we're learning here? The 2014 Immigration Act meant that they had to check your immigration status, or...?
They just told me that the company could be fined £20,000 if they was found to be employing someone with not the right documentation.
Yeah, that's the hostile environment that the Prime Minister has created. Yeah. So you end up in Croydon. What? Well, because you're presuming at the first hurdle, you're thinking, well, this will be very easy to sort out, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. But unfortunately, the original documents that I came over, me and my sister travelled on my mother's passport.
Yeah.
And I had that passport for a long time, but unfortunately it was lost along with my birth certificate.
Oh, who isn't? I mean, crikey, I don't even know if I could get my hands on mine. Mum probably knows where it is, but most of us don't keep this stuff in a kind of hermetically sealed box in the middle of the sitting room, do we? They end up in attics, they end up in boxes, they get lost in moves. Everybody understands this. Go on.
Yeah. Anyway, I was locked up in the Home Office.
Locked up?
Well, I felt I was locked up because I was put in an area, everything was taken off me and put into a locker. When I wanted to go toilet, a security guard had to assist me. I waited around for about 3 hours. Eventually, I was told that I could leave, but her boss, whoever I was talking to, was suggesting that I come back every day to sign on. But she suggested that it wasn't a good idea considering I'd been here for so long.
How are you feeling at this point, Dee?
When I heard yesterday of the Home Secretary's remarks in the House of Commons, I was so angry.
Yeah.
And I was also relieved that maybe this is the end of my journey of trying to sort my status out. Because on being fired from my job, I've got in debt because I was too scared to go for jobs, especially if they asked for documentation. I was afraid to phone your radio station yesterday to talk about it, just in case the people I'm working for now hears. It's been traumatic. I got so depressed I went on to antidepressant pills because I just thought my world is falling apart. I'm alone here. It's been awful. I got a solicitor who messed me about. I've now got my MP involved, who is helping me a great deal, and I just received a letter 2 weeks ago from the Home Office, what the Home Office had sent to my MP, and I'd like to quote just a section which I found so... I just couldn't believe that they're saying it, to tell you the truth.
This is a letter from the Home Office, is it?
This is a letter from the Home Office to my MP. It says that, I'd like to call myself Dee. Dee has suggested that she considers herself to be British and feels that she is being denied what she considers to be her right to be a British national. However, under the national law, she would not currently appear to be British.
Good grief.
Yeah. And when I read that, I just thought, where am I going to go from here? I did not know about the Act that came out in 73. I only learnt that 2 weeks ago.
What year did you arrive here?
1962.
But Rhodesia was still British until 65, wasn't it?
Yeah. Okay. I know that the passport I came on was stamped that I had the right to abode.
So you're a new dimension to this Windrush story, because although there won't be as many of you who came here pre-65 from British Rhodesia, you're enduring exactly the same thing. On what grounds are they saying that you're not British? Because you can't prove it.
Because I can't prove it. I can't prove that I had the right of abode.
And what have they asked you for? Have you been asked to do this 4-decade business as well?
Oh, no, I've already submitted 20 years of documentation that I've lived here, but that's not good enough. Now they want it to be from when I arrived in 62. So, of course, I've been trying to get, in the last week, this is just the last week, I've been trying to gather my medical records, my education records, everything to prove that I have not had a 2-year period out of this country, which I haven't. I've never owned a passport. Yeah, it's been awful. It's very lonely, very you feel that you're outcasted, that you don't belong here.
You do.
And especially when I was fired, my colleagues, I felt so embarrassed and like I'd done something wrong.
They'd been told you were an illegal immigrant, had they?
Not yet, no. But I feel like one.
Yeah. But I just wonder how they explained it to your former colleagues. That's what I was wondering about.
Well, it's just as well we were a very, very tight, close team.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so they understand, and now I have all of their support. Yeah.
What's next, then? I mean, the MP has given you hope. I suspect, and if you want, we can get involved in this on your behalf as well, that I suspect... I don't know whether or not you'd fall under the auspices of what Amber Rudd announced yesterday, but my amateurish thinking would be that you do, because Rhodesia was British until 65. Independence was in 65, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So I would have thought you fell into the same category, and it's just the fact that you haven't got the documentation that has led the Home Office to conclude that you're not. But that means that they're treating everyone as guilty until proven innocent, aren't they?
Exactly.
Everyone.
Exactly. And it just makes you feel that you're not worthy to be here. And I do sometimes, well, not sometimes, when it first happened, every time the door knocked, I thought, they're going to come and take me to the airport. They're going to come and take me to the... It was awful. It still is.
Well, I would sit here normally and say, don't be silly. No one's going to knock on the door and take you to the airport. But they did. They took Paulette Wilson all the way to Heathrow.
Oh, yeah. There's been many more cases, which I've heard about in different areas that's happened, but I can't really quote on them because I haven't really read all of it.
Well, David Lammy's just taken a call at his office at the House of Commons from somebody who's facing deportation tomorrow, the son of a Windrush generation citizen. And here's the thing, I don't know, I can't with 100% certainty say that they knew that this was going to happen, but I'm pretty close to 95%. Listening to people like you, the people we spoke to yesterday, reading a little deeper into this, looking at Theresa May's track record on how much she cares about people who weren't born here or who aren't the same as her. I don't even know what colour you are, and I don't want to know, because it's got nothing to do with the story that we're discussing, and not on this side of it, because you're not quite British enough, is what you're being told, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And where's the proof? Which is difficult after coming here as an infant.
But you're in a better place now than you were 6 months ago.
Yeah, I am, but not financially. I still have to pay for all the fees.
Sue them. Get a class action. Let's get some of our lawyer friends on the case, because I mean, it's nearly £1,000 to register a child. I don't know how much it is for an adult, about 1,200 quid that you've got to find in a country where half of us haven't got £100 set aside.
My daughter does hold a British passport.
Good.
Which is which my husband fought. Yeah, which my husband fought for before he passed away.
Yes.
So that's one good thing.
Don't worry. Okay, I think the traffic is beginning to move in the right direction. But if there's anything at all we can do to help, get back in touch with Beth. All right, stay on the line, and she'll take your details, and you take hers. And if there's anything that just involves a gob on a stick on the radio shouting at politicians, then I'm your gob on a stick, Dee. All right?
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. And that wasn't even the West Indies. It's 11:17. And she was Home Secretary. I think we have to keep reminding ourselves of that. Theresa May hasn't inherited this. She caused it. She hasn't been handed it. She created it. That's the incredible thing, I think, about the way some of the right-wing newspapers, including the one that her chief spokesman used to be political editor of when he wrote the Enemies of the People front page, are beginning to turn their fire on Amber Rudd. Now, I'm not going to segue smoothly from being horribly wrong for the last 20 months when I told you that we should feel some sympathy for Theresa May, that she's making the best of a very bad hand that she's been dealt. I'm afraid that ship has sailed, and I apologise to you for not recognising that earlier. So I'm a little bit cautious of transferring my sympathy for Theresa May directly to Amber Rudd, possibly again, because of the kind of low-level entrenched chauvinism that a chap raised by my mum will always have. I was raised to treat women more respectfully than men, and I appreciate that's possibly unfeminist, and it's a work in progress, but I don't want to do the same mistake. I just don't think Amber Rudd is a racist. And I'm finding it very, very hard not to see Theresa May as someone who thinks that your value is determined by the circumstances of your birth, not necessarily by the colour of your skin, but certainly not by the conduct or the content of your behaviour. And that is, I'm afraid, a racist position. And how could somebody end up in that position? Very simply, by being raised in a way that just encouraged you to see people like you as inherently better. It's not even necessarily an evil thing to do. Well, most religions, in a way, teach their followers that they're better, aspire to being better. But when it comes to birth, accidents of birth and colour of skin, country of origin, you can't be better than me because you were born there any more than you can be better than me because you were born in Bermondsey and I was born in Birmingham, or you were born in Derby and I was born in Doncaster. What possible bearing does that have upon the value of my life or the worth of my citizenship? None whatsoever. Theresa May today looks to me almost incontrovertibly like a woman who thinks that it does. And like a lot of people of her generation, she probably doesn't even realise it, which is how she can stand up and make speeches about being the nasty party and then, within a decade, stand up and lie to conference about the European Convention of Human Rights, the plight of Abu Qatada, and sundry other examples, which, if you weren't listening in the first hour, I'll recap for you shortly. Mark's in Hitchin. Mark, cheer me up, mate. This is a pretty grim morning. What's going on?
It's pretty good. Good morning. Excellent show, I must say, James, this morning. James, I'm afraid it's far worse than what you're saying.
Oh, shut up. Seriously?
No, far worse.
Come on.
Let me explain why, and I'll give you 3 examples. It's easy for you and me on this your radio station to give people our views and our opinions.
Yes.
But let's move away from our view and our opinions and let's talk to the courts of this country. Right, so let me give you 3 examples of what this Conservative leader and this Conservative government have done to the people of this country, irrespective of your colour. Let's go back to January. You may recall that Liberty, Tom Watson, and then the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, who withdrew from the action because of his job as Secretary of State, took this government to court over its surveillance powers and argue it was wrong for them to be able to spy.
You're going off on a hobby horse, and I'm going to let you, but I'm only going to give you a minute or 2, all right?
Okay, no, but let me make the 3 connections.
Right,
they said that was unlawful.
Yes.
You could say that. You could say that that's fine. It was a mistake. Right. In November last year, what happened? The government was taken to court over PIP payments, and what did the courts rule? Is that this government blatantly discriminated against a section of our society who just happened to be disabled.
Yeah, okay.
Go back a year ago, and the Supreme Court of this country made a ruling about the denial of justice in employment tribunals by putting tribunal fees in. And in their judgment, they used some very powerful word, which was not only unlawful, it was unconstitutional. You have a government here, you have a leader of a government who will act against its own nation unconstitutionally, unlawfully, and blatantly discriminated against people as they have done against the Windrush people. I'm 55 years of age, before you ask me.
And don't ask everybody, it's not. I thought it was interesting with the lad in Leeds.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I'd better show that one in.
Yeah.
And where are the resignations? I am sorry, people may not have been deported under Windrush, but let's be honest, people have lost their jobs. People have been denied health care. People have been detained. You heard that lady...
But the system is working. Didn't you listen to Daniel Hannan this morning? This proves the system is working, Mark.
No, it's not. The
Doff
system
cap,
is
tug, forelock, vote, re-smog.
Yeah, but as that lady, she mentioned to you about a £20,000 fine for employers.
Yes.
Well, it's worse than that, actually. What actually else can... And I used to be an employer, and I used to have to get these papers. You also, as an employer, if you, and this is horrible, reasonably have cause to believe people don't have a right to work, if you don't act reasonably, you can be imprisoned for 5 years and given an unlimited fine.
And so, I mean, I hesitate. I'm normally a massive fan of pithy sound bites, or not sound bites, but précis of complicated issues. But this is guilty until proven innocent for anybody who, well, anybody, actually.
Exactly. I had to reject people applying to my companies, and I was the managing director of those companies, but I had to reject them, and I had to give the doctrine because we couldn't employ them because they didn't, and I hate to use this term because it has such harrowing terms, they didn't have the right papers. Where on earth have I heard that before?
Well, a lot of people have just reminded me, as I cautiously suggested I might try to start mustering up some sympathy for Amber Rudd, that the very first of these infernal viral clips that we did on the programme was the one where I read out Mein Kampf and compared it to her speech about lists, for firms being forced to list the foreign workers that they've got on their books. But they did withdraw that. I mean, it went all the way to the top, that one. They were furious, but they did change the policy as a direct result of that intervention.
But did you see what she actually said? I'm going to ask the heads of Commonwealth countries and the High Commissioners, if we sent people and deported them by error, why don't we know? Aren't you in control of that department?
It used to be A-level politics in 1990. You would have these would have all been dismissible offences. They would all be breaches of individual ministerial responsibility. So when the Falklands get invaded, Carrington resigns. We're deporting people in error, the Home Secretary resigns. But there is no government, mate. There's just a holding pattern until the full impact of Brexit arrives, and then we have to sort of dust ourselves down, pick ourselves up and start all over again.
Yep. But James, that, you know, like I said, I'm old enough to see so many different colours of so many governments. But, you know, yesterday, the Prime Minister stood up and blatantly lied. We broke international law to go into Syria. Just say we did it. Just say that's what we did. We may have done it for the right reason, but we broke it.
I don't know that. No, we're going to part company now on that. I don't think we have broken international law going into Syria, but I think we've got plenty of to gnaw on and to chew on.
Okay.
And also, I'd said yesterday, it's quite bizarre. I had an astonishing Twitter exchange with Peter Hitchens yesterday, who I've always quite liked. We weren't talking about whether or not the invasion was justified, the bombing campaigns were justified yesterday. We were talking about why it would fall to the United Kingdom to do anything if it was. But we'll park that for another day, Mark. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. I don't know what to do now. I mean, you know how this programme works. Sometimes we feel that we've stumbled upon something quite significant that perhaps hasn't been noticed elsewhere. Certainly can't do that today because we followed behind, like a Eric Cantona flavoured seagull, we followed behind the trawler of Amelia Gentleman's journalism over at The Guardian. I feel bad about that. If it turns out I've had a couple of things in my inbox over the last few years describing these sort of situations and I haven't properly responded to them, I will hang my head in shame. I don't think I have, but, you know, we get thousands a day, so something might have slipped through the net. And yet we've been sitting in a country that has been slowly reintroducing old-fashioned racism into the public bloodstream, to the delight of many people, absolute delight of many people. And, of course, because racism is fundamentally irrational, once it starts impacting upon policy and human behaviour, this happens. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. How do you create a hostile environment for people that aren't supposed to be here without having a proper understanding of who is and who isn't supposed to be here? Answer, you can't. So you stop with the policies. But the Daily Mail won't let you, because if you don't come down hard on immigrants, no, not them, but them, you don't come down hard on them, we'll stop propping up your pathetic premiership. So we've got to come down hard on them. But how do you work out who they are? You can't work out who they are because there are thousands of people who've come here as children from Windrush. I suspect that the call from Birmingham about Rhodesia is going to prove pertinent as well. Probably from other British territories. Significant swathes of the country don't have passports. They never leave. It's expensive as well. But we've got to carry on. We've got to crack down on these immigrants. Yeah, but we can't work out who is here wrongly. Right. So we've got to crack down on something, but we can't actually work out who deserves to be cracked down on and who doesn't. Should we just crack down on all of them? Yes, Prime Minister. Where the suspicion has turned into a suggestion and is rapidly approaching a conviction. When you look at Theresa May's track record, everything from the go-home vans to the lies about Abu Qatada's deportation, to the lies about students, to the lies about illegal immigrants. I am not making this up, being allowed to stay just because they'd got a cat even. You look at the obsession with numbers, and now you look at the Windrush scandal, of which she was warned and over which she has presided. And only yesterday did she agree, after initially disagreeing, to a request from the heads of these countries to at least talk to them about what's going on. I am afraid that our Prime Minister does not look at people in this country as equal to her. She looks at people from the West Indies as, let's just say, different, not necessarily inferior. She looks at Dee, who came here from Zimbabwe, or what was then Rhodesia, before independence. She's created a system in which they are all guilty until proven innocent. And it's sick. It's profoundly sick. But in the course of the last 3 or 4 years, since we allowed racism back into the bloodstream of the country, means this will not, I don't think, even this won't be enough to slam the brakes upon the direction of travel. Even this. I hope I'm wrong. I'll tell you what else I hope. I hope there's analysis of everything that we've been talking about today that doesn't lead to such pessimistic conclusions. Phone lines are characteristically busy today, but if you want to, you will be triply welcome today if you can put and I will reserve the right to cite some of those other examples of her track record, but in the context of the Windrush shambles, is there anyone who can actually sell it as a kind of bureaucratic snafu rather than as an inevitable consequence of trying to create the hostile environment she described? This is just the tip of the iceberg, James, says this text. If you are already here and apply to renew your status, it'll cost you £3,000 plus your NHS fees, despite working and already paying taxes. All it takes now is the Star of David to be put on our coats. They wanted a hostile environment and they've got it. 11:37 is the time. Rick is in Birmingham. Rick, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. Thank you for having me on. So I wasn't actually planning to come on air, but your producer kind of twisted my arm to get me on. The reason why I'm calling, I've been listening to you for a long time. It's really just to give people some hope and have possibly a positive story out of all of this. I can't go into too much details for obvious reasons.
Of course.
Nonetheless, there's key things I want to say. Number one, thank you for raising this because we went through this. My wife and I, she's from a Commonwealth country. She was from here from a child before I met her. She went through the exact same process, and we felt very alone, very isolated. Unfortunately, our case has now been resolved. But hearing you speak about this topic, it just brought back all those memories, and I felt I had to call in. So I called into your producer initially just to give her the details of the person that helped us tremendously, and she urged me to call you. This is the advice that I'd like to give to anybody in the situation. Number one, yes, it's very lonely, it's very isolating, but what you're doing right now by raising the profile helps immensely. It gets people like myself and other people calling up, recommending angels like the person that helped us. Number two, there is a way out of it, but it requires, and from my own experience, you need to be quite savvy, which I understand. My wife is extremely savvy. She put hours and hours. If I could tell you, James, the amount of hours my wife spent compiling documents, documenting her life from primary school up until university, documenting. We had probably a separate, you get those hard drives from Amazon, there's 1 terabyte hard drives. We had a hard drive full of images, James, documenting every single aspect of her school life. We had testimonials from her friends. Now, here's the crux.
I'm going to add advice to your advice, actually, and I'm going to say that the people listening to this who are frightened about the situation they're in won't have to jump through as many hoops as your wife has because of what Amber Rudd said in the House of Commons yesterday. But the light at the end of the tunnel that you're illuminating is valuable nonetheless. And of course, if Amber Rudd doesn't deliver on what she promised yesterday, then all bets are off.
I hope not. And the best advice I can give you is get yourself a reputable, very, very good solicitor. That's the only way we are where we are today. We had a solicitor who was compassionate, empathetic, and bloody good at what she does.
But also expensive.
She was very expensive.
Yeah, so that's not going to be an option for a lot of people listening, which is why we have to hold Amber Rudd to hold her feet to the fire over what she promised yesterday. But what, of course, I'm sounding like I'm raining on your parade. You are telling us that it is doable.
It's doable, but you need a lot of perseverance. We went through some very hard times. As a married couple, you get peaks and troughs, and we had a lot of troughs because of this. Because you have to bear in mind, it has a knock-on impact on everybody around you. You can't. It's embarrassing. You can't tell people certain things. It affects your work life. You can't go on holidays, etc., etc. So my heart goes out to these people. I've only just come out of this sentence as of 3-4 months ago, and it's a big relief. And my heart goes out to these people. I'm going to leave the details of the solicitor with your producer, if that's okay. And
yes, of course it is, and we'll see if we can help. Although I am, as I say, hoping that what Amber Rudd said yesterday will remove the need for individual legal recourse. I mean, how would you fix it? Answer: bring back the 2014 clause that the government, or the Home Secretary at the time, deliberately took out of the 2014 Immigration Act, claiming that adequate protections were already in place for people who were initially granted temporary rights to remain in the UK. Just think about that for a minute, because we're covering a lot of ground today. 2014, Home Secretary Theresa May. The Home Office is warned that removing a key protection from the statute books for some British residents of the Windrush generation who could face deportation would be a mistake. The Home Office, headed by Theresa May, responded by saying that the clause was not included in the 2014 Immigration Act because, and this is where I think democracy has actually broken a bit in Britain, because this would have been a resignation issue, I'm sure, at previous points in my life. The Home Office said in 2014, adequate protections are already in place for people who were initially granted temporary rights to remain in the UK and have stayed for decades. So precisely the plights that we've been learning about for the last 2 days. The woman locked up in the Yarlswood Immigration Centre, the men who've lost their job, the man who can't get treatment for his prostate cancer, the British people who've lived here since childhood. Theresa May was warned that this would happen, and her department said, no, it won't. Protections are already in place. Now, I don't know what you do for a living, but if I warned you that something terrible was about to happen on your watch, and you said, no, it isn't, don't worry, X, Y, and Z are already in place, and then something terrible happened on your watch, what would happen to you? If I said to Beth this morning, I'm going to go on air and describe so-and-so as an out-and-out paedophile, and she said, well, has he been convicted of anything? Well, first of all, she said, is he still alive? Because if he's dead, of course, libel doesn't apply. And I said, no, he's definitely still alive. I know he's a paedophile. I've been reading all about it on the internet. And she said to me, you can't do this. It's libel. You'll be fired and you'll be prosecuted. And I'll say, how dare you question my judgment? Get back in your box. And then I came on air and libelled someone by calling them a paedophile. What would happen to me? If you went to work today and you told your boss that the fuel cap was loose on the forklift truck and if you didn't fix it, it might blow up, and your boss said, shut up, get back in your box, and then the forklift truck blew up with someone on it, what would you think about your boss? Theresa May was told that removing this clause would endanger the security and the status of the children of the Windrush generation. And her department responded by saying that adequate protections are already in place for people who were initially granted temporary rights to remain in the UK and have stayed for decades. It's not even that technical. The exhortation from the Labour Party and from lawyers and from charities was to encourage the government to just put the clause back in so that all long-standing Commonwealth residents are protected from enforced removal, not just those who have gained settled status. And once they took that settled status out of the clause, that meant that women like Dee and callers queuing up to talk to us today could turn up at work on Monday and be told by their bosses that unless they could prove they had the right to be here by demonstrating that they had been here for each of the last 4 decades and had the documentary evidence to prove it, and could also, I think, and I may have misunderstood this, but I think also in some cases proving that you hadn't spent a period of 2 years or more outside the country, then I'm going to have to fire you. And why hasn't this caused a bigger scandal before now? Well, you have to ask yourself whether it's because of the people who've been suffering and whether there's something about them that means that the government, most of the media, the establishment, to use that horribly overused word, care a little bit less about people like them than they do about people like themselves. Just ask yourself. Don't have to answer it, but at least ask. We will continue with this conversation throughout the course of the week, no doubt, and I'm sure colleagues will pick it up. But I'm minded to do something else after 12, with your permission. It will obviously involve everyone currently on hold on the switchboard not being able to get on air, but I'll let you decide. 03456060973 remains the number that you need. It is, I think, impossible to avoid the conclusion when you look at her track record that, and racist is a weird word, possibly overused, although I'm beginning to think it might have been underused. Oddly, a complete U-turn from me, because you don't look at Theresa May and sort of see a shaven-headed, knuckle-dragging skinhead, or even the sort of chalk-striped, faux aristocrat style of racism that's become popular in Britain lately. The sort of weird racists who dress like gamekeepers because they sort of think it makes them look posh, although fascists have always loved uniforms. You don't look at Theresa May and think any of that. And I don't want to think any of that. But I do look at her and think, yeah, you're not quite. If you're not, if you're not really like us, then you probably don't deserve the same protection from the law that we do. Kind of what she suggested when she was talking about the European Convention on Human Rights being suspended, when she was fibbing about the case of Abu Qatada, when she lied about someone being refused deportation because they had a cat, when she ignored evidence and facts about students coming here on visas and overstaying, except it turned out they weren't. When she ignored advice asking for a clause which would specifically protect the people that we've been hearing about from the last 2 days, from the plight that we've been hearing about for the last 2 days, and she ignored that advice. When she sent those go-home vans out onto the streets, onto our streets, to no purpose whatsoever except to ramp up the hostile environment which she's explicitly described herself as wanting to create. A hostile environment. And how can you do that? Well, if you haven't got empathy for these people because you don't really think of them as being the same type of people as you, and you know that the things that you're introducing aren't going to apply to people like you, they're only going to apply to people like them, I think you can do it. And sleep at night. I don't think you could. I don't think I could. But she did. Mario's in Finsbury Park. Mario, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, listen, James, I just want to say something simple, really, because I've been listening to the programme from this morning.
Yes.
And to my concern, I'm not black. I'm not from a Caribbean country, but my parents came over in the early 60s. And to my concern, personally, when my parents came over, they got documents. They got all their documents and et cetera, et cetera. So what I can't understand is why is everybody having a pop at the Conservative Party at present, which this has been going on for so long? So why didn't they get documentations so far back? So what I can't understand, even if so that it's come to light today...
Yes.
This is the
because
whole...
they didn't know they had... I think the answer to your question, if I've understood it, is that they had no idea that they had to. They were British. They were invited to come over here. They brought their children. And it's their home. I don't think I could prove that I've been here for the last
James,
46 years.
Would I be able to say to you then, so you wouldn't have documentation because you're British or you're English?
Yeah. I didn't think I'd ever need it.
It doesn't make sense.
Why?
And furthermore...
Well, what do you mean it doesn't make sense? It's what I think. The idea that I would ever have to prove...
What you say, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm disagreeing with what... Obviously, they've come to conclusion of saying, well, they're British. They don't need documents.
No, they haven't come to that conclusion. They are.
Well...
Where did your parents come from?
My parents came from Italy. They're both Italian. They didn't know how to speak English.
No one's ever suggested that Italy was part of the Commonwealth, have they?
Correct.
So your parents knew they weren't British?
That's right.
So they got their paper in order, they got their documentation in order?
That's right.
Because they knew they weren't British?
Well, Yes.
These people are British, so they didn't think they'd ever have to prove it. Is it clear to you now?
It is clear to me, but I can say...
No, there's no but now, mate. You phoned in to ask why didn't they do what my parents did, and the answer is because your parents are Italian and they're British. Okay, so we cool?
Well, I would say not, but...
All right, well, tell me what you still don't understand, Mario, mate.
I still believe that even if they were British, they would still need documentation.
Well, I haven't got any, and I'm British.
Well, how can you not have documentation? You haven't got a passport.
Where were you in 1978?
I was here in England.
Where were you living?
In Peterborough.
Prove it.
I can prove it.
Go on, prove it now.
I can't prove it now because I'm over here.
What?
I'm talking to you on the phone.
Well, prove it now. Prove it by tea time. And then prove where you were in 1988. And then I want the postcode of 1998. And I want to see your rent book. And I want to see your mortgage details. And I want absolute evidence that you had the right to be here then and that you haven't been anywhere else in between. Oh, and by the way, your parents were Italian, so they could never have believed that they were British.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. You're just saying everything.
Yeah, all right, mate. Philip's in Ladbroke Grove. Philip, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Philip.
James, I came over here as a 7-year-old from the island of Grenada.
Right.
And when I came over here, I had a British passport. And
now, just for the benefit of Mario and anybody, could you just spell British for me? Is it spelled Italian?
I know some people really don't understand when they.
You can explain it to them, Philip, but you can't understand it for them.
But anyway, when I came over here, I had a British passport. Went to school over here in Ladbroke Grove, Isaac Newton School. I mean, I even had trials for England.
Yeah, all right. No one likes to show off.
Anyway, I used to travel about, with my school. We went on a trip to Europe on my British passport, and then I lost my British passport. So I just used to go into the post office at the time and get a temporary passport.
I remember them, yes.
Yeah, and I was always given one, always given one. And then one day they said they no longer have that. And I thought to myself, how am I going to travel?
Yeah.
And I did an application for a British passport, and they told me I can't have one.
Right, on what ground?
I don't know. They said you at the time, I couldn't remember, but I can't remember why I couldn't have one. And so I went and applied because I didn't travel for years because I was thinking, oh, goodness, I don't have any passport. What am I going to do?
Yes.
So I had to apply for a Grenadian passport. And I got a Grenadian passport. But everything in my file, when I used to sign up that says, are you British? I used to say, yes, I'm British, I'm British, I'm British. But my mother, before she died, she warned me. She says, Philip, you better get a British passport. Because all my family have. My 5 sisters have a British passport. My mother, my father had a British passport. But because I lost mine, I couldn't get one.
Right.
I've traveled now. My aunt, I didn't travel for a long time, but I had an aunt who died in Grenada, and I had to travel. And that's when I applied for a passport because I thought, oh, goodness, I need to travel. And I don't have one, and I got a Grenadian passport. It's fine, but the whole point is the principle. The principle.
But is it fine,
my
though?
Parents, they knew everyone in my family had a British passport, and I wasn't able to get one. And on this day, I still have a Grenadian passport, and although they put indefinite stay in my passport, they took away my right of being a British.
So this notion of a hierarchy becomes more formal under your story, doesn't it? This because you are less British than me in law somehow now.
Well, absolutely. And I've been to jobs, and they said, have you got any proof, And I thought to myself, and I've had to sort of leave the interview because I thought to myself, goodness, what proof do they need, And because now I had my indefinite stay in my Grenadian passport, that's a proof. I have my, national insurance number. And so on and so forth. So everything was fine. But I was being warned by my family. They know people who's been deported.
This is the privilege of people like me, isn't it? Is really only having to hear it from you secondhand, and your mum having this sense that there's a lack of permanence in your life unless you do everything you can to cover yourself. I didn't even know that existed. It's a little bit like a Jewish person explaining why Israel is so important to me and suddenly going, oh God, It is different.
A couple of weeks ago, my sister, she rang me up, she says, Philip, you better get a British passport.
Yeah.
And someone from church gave me a letter and they say, Philip, this is for you. This is what is happening. You really need to organize yourself, you know. And what I'm really peeved about is they took my right away of having a British passport. Not that I'm against my Grenadian passport, because that's the only thing, but I don't have a British passport because of all this, what's been going on. I've got 5 children, they all have British passport, my wife's British passport, and they always says to me, apply for it, but because I got turned down, I never bothered again.
And
is there any place for me to say, look, I need to get a British passport?
I don't know. I mean, I'm on a flipping learning curve that's steeper than any I can remember, but I would have thought belt and braces, mate, would be my advice to you at the moment. Belt and braces, although hopefully Amber Rudd will solve some of the problems that you describe if she is held to the promises that she made in the House of Commons yesterday. And I give the last word to my pocket statistician, Incorrigible FCA, who reminds us of 2 occasions on which the Home Secretary, Theresa May, tried to hide official government statistics that showed immigration to the UK in a favourable light. This would be the notion of net contributions and the essential presence of immigration for economic growth. And the idea that you'd want to keep a lid on that, even if it had been reported by your own department, because it didn't fit with the rhetoric around immigration that you were keen to promote. And I don't know. I still don't know if you would call her in technical terms an actual racist. But I think you're going to get treated differently under her prime ministership depending on your colour. Where our examination, if you like, of this hostile environment, which Theresa May has so successfully created. Sadly, of course, it includes, it would appear, tens of thousands of people who have got as much right to be here as I have, or you have, but they certainly don't feel that way today, has led to Ruth getting in touch with us, or us getting in touch with Ruth. Ruth is the mother of a young man who is facing deportation tomorrow, I believe. Ruth, is that right?
Right, James, yes. I absolutely love your show.
Oh, really? Oh, how remarkable. Thank you so much. Gosh, well, let's hope we can help. What's going on, Ruth?
Okay, my son has a ticket to leave in the morning. The only reason he hasn't been deported is because we said we would buy our own ticket because we would feel so ashamed, you know.
Yes, of course I do.
Does nothing wrong. He has never been in any trouble at all. He's clean living.
So what happened? Where are you from originally? Where did you?
St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
So you came from St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
I came from the Windrush generation, which was in 1959.
In the 50s, yeah.
Here, I worked with the government. I was a civil servant, and I worked for years here. 1980, I went to St. Vincent for a break, and I had my son then. He came back to England with me for a while, but I sent him back home. I was having difficulties. So he went back home, and his dad, well, I came back and worked. When he was 18, he came over. He went to college as a student. We paid for him as a student to go to school, etc., etc. He's left the country after his visa was expired. In, I think it was 1910, he went back to the West Indies, 2010, sorry. And somebody he was going out with for a while got married. She was European.
Yeah.
And they came back to live in England, had a lot of difficulties, and the marriage broke up. So that means that he apparently...
So he would have had citizenship if he was still married to her, but he's not. And why does he not get it just by dint of being your son?
So...
Because you haven't...
So we applied.
Right.
Actually, he was working when he was married, and he continued working. In 2015, I was diagnosed with a very life-threatening disease. And there was no money, no income, and he had to work, and he took me to hospitals and looked after me and cared for me up till now. We've applied in 2016, and after waiting about 18 months, they refused him.
What reason did they give?
Well, I think it had to do with his marriage breaking up. I just feel they had a relation. They had a thinking that he married for convenience, but he did.
But I don't care about his marriage. He's your son.
Well, they're not considering that either. I mean, we have been stressed. It's made my situation worse. He's been depressed. I mean, we really have been suffering for the last couple of years. The Home Office has made us feel less than human beings. They would just refuse. We paid lawyers, and they kept saying...
But he's your son, and he wants to look after you.
I know.
In the country that's been your home since 1959.
That's right.
To which you were invited by our government.
That's right. My parents were.
How big a hole? I mean, I don't want to inquire too much about your health. I'm certainly not going to inquire about your age. That would be very ungallant of me. But how much looking after you does he do at the moment?
Well, everything really, because of my age.
And what's going to happen when he's not there anymore?
I don't know. I have no idea. No, nothing could replace a family member or my son.
Can I talk to him briefly?
Sure you can.
Ruth, thank you.
Hello?
Hello, mate. What's your understanding of why they've told you that you can't stay here, that you can't live here anymore?
I don't know. It's so complicated.
Yeah.
When my wife left, obviously, I'm left to the dogs. You know, I didn't know whether I was coming or going. And as she left, quite depressed, Mom found out she had cancer. Sorry, Mom, I have to tell them the truth.
Go on.
So I just dropped everything and became tunnel vision. You know, like
sure.
Your mom takes care of you your whole life. It's your time to help her back. You know.
Yes.
So it started with doctor's visits and operations, which mean getting to Oxford from where we live here in Slough.
Okay.
So I had to get a job because Mom couldn't work. She couldn't really move around like we used to. So I had to get some money just to get us to and through the hospital and, you know, get some food to eat. So I obviously didn't realize that I was breaking their laws. I just was just trying to help my mother, you know. By not reporting myself in and saying, oh, my wife left, from that moment on, they didn't care what happened after that.
Because your immigration status depended upon your marriage as opposed to your mother.
Exactly. So with Mom having the cancer, obviously nothing else mattered, and I just knuckled down, worked, and when I had my holidays and my days off, I took her to the hospital. I made sure that those days were in thing with her operations. And now they've asked me to leave, and we've been through judicial review. You see, it's a roundabout. You have to pay lawyers. There's the courts you have to pay. At the end of it, you have no money, and they're threatening to send you home. So, I mean, every knock on the door, you think they're coming to get you. Every car that pull ups outside it, you think it's them. It's yeah, and just trying to stay strong for Mom has been impossible because I had very little strength of my own with the circumstances.
It just sucks the marrow out of you, doesn't it? And that notion of you're not the first person in the last 2 days to tell me about the fear of the car pulling up outside or the fear of the knock on the door. And I can see why, because it's happening. It's not. You don't. Go on.
The problem is, sir, is that I'm about to leave tomorrow, and they have asked us to get in touch with the social service to see how they could help Mom. And really, it's been months now we've been trying, and there is no set way they can help. So I'm leaving my mother tomorrow knowing that she's going to be here alone, probably with surgeries and not knowing how she's going to take care of herself. And I'm sure she wouldn't last long like this, to be honest, you know? That's where we are.
I know your MP is Dominic Grieve. I know he's trying to intervene on your behalf, but you're planning... what, if you don't get on the plane tomorrow, what happens? Do they come and take you away?
Possibly. I mean, when they said when they turned me down, I got in touch with them and said I'll leave because I didn't want to be disgraced, sent home, deported. You know, I couldn't deal with that on top of everything.
No, because of the stigma and the idea of sitting in handcuffs on an aeroplane or whatever it would involve. I understand your position completely. It's not about me anymore per se. It was just Mom. You know, she needed a little love and attention and a little care. You know, so. What's the point of me being all the way over there in the Caribbean, a place I don't really know much anymore, and my mom's there suffering by herself? I don't know. There's no light at the end of the tunnel at the moment, then?
Yeah, it's been no silver lining for a while, so.
Yeah. Mate, I don't know what to say to you. This is, you know that Theresa May talked about trying to create a hostile environment. How do those words reach your ears?
Well, it's I've been living in this hostility. It's the only world I know, and I don't know. I love Britain. It's been my home for so long. I don't really know anything else, you know, but. It is hostile, and I don't know if they mean for it to be this way, but that's just the way it is. And you put through this red tape with finances and lawyers, and at the end of it, you're left with no money. There's no way forward. You put all your eggs in your basket, and it's dropped off at the end, and there's nothing. You have nothing. And my loved one, my mama, I don't know how you are with your mom, but I didn't care, you know, before, but for Mom, yeah. I don't know what to do, you know, it's a bit rough.
A bit rough. You're a master of understatement. Can I say goodbye to your mum, would you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, mate.
Hi, James.
Hey, Ruth. I don't know what to say to you, my love, but I didn't want to just say goodbye to your boy and not say goodbye to you.
Thank you so much, James.
David Lammy is a good man. You've got him on your case. Dominic Grieve. Dominic Grieve is a good man. You've got him on your case.
Thank you so much, James.
Just let me know what's going on, all right? And if I can shout, and that's all I've got. I've just got a loud voice. Ruth, I'm so sorry I couldn't do more.
Always loved you.
Thank
you. Bye.
God bless. Hostile enough for you, Prime Minister? This environment? Hostile enough now? Is it? I hope you've got someone to look after you when you're 75 and suffering from cancer, because she hasn't. Most of us are decent, seriously. Most of us. Maybe I used to think almost all of us, but most of us. And what did you think was going to happen when we let these monsters out of the woods, when we allowed these ludicrous complaints about political correctness to be listened to, when we let disgusting people take up almost permanent residence on television screens and programmes like Question Time? What did you think was going to happen when you let racist liars tell their lies to a weak, enfeebled Prime Minister? What did you think was going to happen? Oh, we must do something. We must do something. Look at all the front pages. Migrant, 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 migrant. We must do something, must do something. What are you going to do? I don't know, but we must do something. But what can you do? You can't fight dragons. They don't exist. Yeah, but immigration's ruining everything. You know that it isn't, but you have to make it look as if you think that it is. Otherwise, the newspapers are going to crucify you. All right, maybe get rid of the students, but they're not overstaying. Here are the figures. Yeah, but still, just hope no one digs too deeply into it. Maybe sit on reports commissioned by my own department that show the net gains of immigration. You can't do that. Yeah, we can. Look, 85% of the British media is chomping at the bit for anti-immigration rhetoric. They're not going to hold us to account. Yeah, but something's going to snap eventually. You can't start deporting people who are looking after their cancer-stricken mother who's been here since 1959. Yeah, we can. No one will notice. No one will care. They're poor. They're black. They're only slightly British. What did you think was going to happen? Have you got your country back yet? So much control. I'm going to change the subject because I think I'm going to cry. But anyway, well, I said we'd end with some good news. I'm just being told by the producer it's only semi-good news. Dr. Luke Ong, we met last week because he was facing deportation despite having worked here as a doctor and done all of his training here. I read today that you'd had good news. You've just told Beth that it's not to crack open the champagne yet, Luke. Is that right?
No, not yet.
Go on.
Because we're not necessarily out of the woods.
Oh.
The BBC got hold of a statement from the Home Office, which I didn't receive.
Really?
And the thing is, upon clarification with my lawyer,
yes,
it appears that until we get that final reconsideration, we definitely, which are no guarantees positive.
Yes.
We can't say it's a done deal yet.
Okay. Scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you?
5 or 6.
Oh, okay.
Out of 10, because very possible. Even if it does go in my favour, there is the issue of waiting months, weeks, possibly even months, before I get that piece of plastic that says I'm allowed to return to work. So I don't necessarily think it's, a cause for celebration yet.
But the Home Office has announced it's abandoning legal proceedings, no?
It's abandoning its appeal.
Right.
I've not received confirmation of this from the court.
But as soon as you receive the confirmation, you'll be happier?
We still have the issue of the reconsideration, because that's definitely something that's not been
just, you know what, this will teach me to read the Daily Mail, won't it? Apparently you told them I'm really grateful to the Mail for standing up for me, and the support as a whole has given. They've done it. They've taken out the bit where you've said it's not time to celebrate yet, and they've just tried to turn it into.
It's definitely not. It's not sealed.
No.
I have been closely following the Generation Windrush as well, because they're I definitely feel that these people are very deserving of being in this country. They've been here longer than I have.
Hostile environment, Dr. Luke Ong. We will talk again. I don't know, for what it's worth, I've got a feeling now that the nature of your case is such that they will not follow through on some of the threats that you feared. But those are mere words. Many thanks to you for making some time to talk to us today. I'm hearing, frankly, a terrifying amount of stories now coming through, which I'll do my best to pass on to people who can provide more meaningful help than I can. That's it for another day.